Okay, so welcome to the second of two online seminars that MDUK is holding this afternoon as part of our Muscles Matter online seminar series, Living with a Muscle Wasting Condition in 2020 and Beyond. In this series of 12 seminars, we're exploring what it's like to live with a muscle wasting condition in these unprecedented times. 6 of the seminars are exploring specific conditions which are aligned to awareness days, weeks and months that are taking place. And the remaining 6 are looking at a range of topics relevant to anyone affected by muscle wasting conditions. After this session, we'll be halfway through the series, and so far we've covered spinal muscular atrophy, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, mitochondrial disease, living in a world with COVID-19, and assistive and accessible technology. So this afternoon, of course, we're exploring education. And the list of remaining seminars and the link to go to if you want to book further sessions or view recordings of previous ones should be on your screen now. MDUK is holding these seminars because for now we are unable to bring our community together through our information days, our family fun days, our national conferences and our muscle groups. I think it's important though to highlight that our helpline remains available to anyone affected by muscle wasting conditions. And so do please contact us if you have any questions or are in need of any support. We can help you with information and we can either support you directly or point you to where you can get that support from. So the number and email address should be on your screen now. You can call us on 0800 652 6352. Or you can email info@musculardystrophyuk.org. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who supported our work through volunteering their time, including today's panel, or by making a donation. We're hugely indebted to everyone who's helped us ensure that we can continue delivering activity like today's session. There is a vast array of ways in which you can support MDUK, so do please also contact us if you'd like to discuss that further, or jump on our website to make a donation or look at volunteering opportunities. So a note now on how you can ask questions or make comments throughout the session. To do this, we'll be using the Q&A function, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. Please type your question or comment, and I'll feed that into the discussion with the panel. To help us manage the technical side of the event, we won't be calling on questioners to ask their questions directly. Any questions we don't manage to cover or that we don't know the answer to, we'll seek to answer through our website afterwards. And a reminder that we are recording this session and that it will be made available later this week along with the ones we've previously held. So before I introduce our panel, I'm just going to provide a bit of information about what's available from MDUK and from another organisation we work with if you need information, advice and support specifically around education. So firstly, at MDUK, we've produced a comprehensive guide on inclusive education for children with muscle wasting conditions, and that guide's designed for both families and for schools. It was originally created thanks to a grant from the Department for Education, and it's now in its 3rd edition with input from a whole host of experts. It's available through our website, and the easiest way to find it, I found, is to Google MDUK Education Guide to avoid having to spell out a very long link, or you can just contact our helpline and we'll get a link sent straight to you after this. The guide covers everything you might want to know about, from how to work in partnership between schools and parents, which is a theme we'll be exploring today, your child's health in school, considerations about the school environment, SEN provision, and goes right through to transitioning out of school. It also helps explain some of the processes and systems that you might need to navigate, including education, health and care plans, or EHCPs, which again, I'm sure will feature this afternoon. An organisation that we're looking to work more closely with and who were unable to join us this afternoon is Contact, the charity for families with disabled children. They support families by providing guidance and information through their website and helpline, and the details of which should be on your screen now. Their website includes a common questions tool, a live chat service, a library of podcasts for parent carers, and an online shop offering a range of practical products for children with additional needs and their families. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our fantastic panel who've given up their time to join us this afternoon. I'm going to introduce them all now before then opening into a discussion after they've given us some initial thoughts. So I'd like to welcome Gerry McMenemy from the MDUK Family Fund, Muscle In with Sorely, Gerry and his wife Sarah's son Sorley was diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy in August 2017 when he was 3 years old. Since the diagnosis, both Gerry and Sarah have been keen to raise awareness of the condition and also to support MDUK. Creating the best future possible for Sorley is their priority, and even months before Sorley started in Primary 1, they've worked with the head teacher and staff at their chosen school, St Margaret's Primary in Cowie in central Scotland, to get the best care and support and the best environment and outcomes for Sorley. Jordan Mossom from Maryport in Cumbria is a recent graduate photographer from the University of Cumbria with a documentary project about living with Duchenne. Natalie Smith is a clinical nurse specialist at Great Ormond Street Hospital. Natalie has a background in children's intensive care and has worked with the neuromuscular team at Great Ormond Street since 2017. She is the lead nurse for the Trust for SMA, but works across all other neuromuscular conditions. Part of her role includes working with families and schools to get the right support in place for children living with muscle wasting conditions. Jane O'Connor is a neuromuscular care advisor, a post that she's held for nearly 10 years in the Birmingham area. And she works with both children and adults, and especially supporting people around transition. She has a nursing and social care background, and in previous roles has worked in the public sector, the private sector, and the voluntary sector, so has a broad range of skills to support patients and families. And finally, Liz Williams is an MDUK peer support volunteer and chair of the FSH support group, which is run through MDUK. Liz is an active and passionate advocate for people with FSHD. Following her own diagnosis in 2004, Liz became a peer support volunteer for MDUK and works with us to develop information and resources to increase understanding of FSHD and wider issues affecting all people with muscle wasting conditions. She manages a Facebook group that provides support to more than 650 people. In 2018, Liz won MDUK's President's Awards for Outstanding Achievement. So as well as advising families affected by FSHD on a range of topics, including education, she's also navigated the EHCP system herself with her own son. So that's quite an impressive panel. I'm going to try and hold my own whilst talking to them. Gerry, I wonder if I could start with you. It sounds like you've had a really good experience of working with Sorley's school. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what that's entailed and anything that's worked particularly well in your discussions with them.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the invitation to join everyone this afternoon. Sorley is just starting Primary 3. He's been back for 4 or 5 weeks, so we're now just embarking on our 3rd year of working with the school. And yeah, we actually have had quite a positive experience overall. It's had its wee challenges along the way, but there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of meeting with the school. The school's got an absolute open door policy in relation to bringing in whether it's neuromuscular advisors or someone from the clinical team, or just anybody that's got a bit of experience that's going to make Sorley's journey through the school that much more easier for him and for us, and for the school as well. Going right back to the beginning, Sorley's diagnosis came while he was still at nursery school, and he was in it was a nursery that's not associated to the particular primary school, so there was no direct linkage between the nursery and the school. So we had about 4 months or so to identify the right school for him. The school that Sorley goes to, St Margaret's Primary School in Cowie, is not his direct catchment area primary school, but Sarah and I had a look at some of the schools that were within reasonable travelling distance from where we stay, that had I suppose an environment, a physical environment that we knew would be perfect for Sorley for the 7 years that he's going to be at school, however his mobility changes over that time. And having done that, we then met with the head teacher, who's a very forward-thinking chap. It's a small school. There's 110, 120 pupils across the 7-year groups, and maybe 3 months before Sorley's start date at the school, and we were discussing how things would be different, how we could make it as inclusive as possible for him. and it was something that the school hadn't dealt with someone with a muscle wasting condition, never mind Duchenne muscular dystrophy, previously. And everybody came on board very, very quickly. We were very keen to learn, so that when Sorley started on day one at school, he already had a one-to-one support for learning assistant in the class exclusively for him to help him. And as I said, we're now going into his third year there, and that's that same person that's been with him, through that. And we really have needed that support, or Sorley's needed that support, because he has found it really difficult, really challenging, and really exhausting, just trying to cope with what you would class as a normal school day. So the school's been very keen to learn, and they've been very keen to get involved as well. They were aware, or we made them aware, that Muscle with Sorley was the brand that we use with MDUK, to raise awareness and to raise funds, and they've absolutely embraced that, and particularly through Go Orange Day, where the whole school has become involved in that. All classes, all teachers, all staff, they've raised money on Go Orange Day, and the last 2 years that we've been invited in for the whole school assembly that they have for that day, there's not one pupil or member of staff who has not been brightly dressed in orange, and it's a humbling but a lovely sight, and they really rally around behind Sorley, make him really feel part of the family, feel special, and listen to what he's got to say as well, because in the week running up to Go Orange, the school also gets Sorley to pop into the other 6 classes that are not his class, and just chat to them about what it's like to live with a muscle wasting condition.
Thanks, Gerry. That's great. I'm going to abuse the chair's privilege and ask you a quick follow-up question. I was a lifetime ago, so May 2019. I was able to meet with you and a number of other family funds in the Lake District, and there was a really big theme there about how to kind of have that initial conversation with schools, and a big theme that came out was using sort of fundraising and awareness as a kind of an accessible way to have that conversation. So it sounds like that's something you've experienced, and that's quite a kind of nice sort of soft, in inverted commas, way to raise awareness around what Sorley, the support Sorley needs, and kind of what he's living with. Is that right?
Absolutely, and it's down to that personal approach as well. It's not a phone call into the school. It's not a letter or that. It's can I come in and speak to you? And it's not even about drip feeding some of the information. It's just about a long meeting, laying it all on the table and saying, here's what we want to partner with you to be able to do. And things have, as I said, it's had its challenges, it's had its misunderstandings, but the phone line's open for anybody to phone in, for us to speak to the school, good dialogue with the teachers, and we've had regular team around the child meetings, and there's quite a lot of things have come out of that have actually maybe forced the hand of other statutory agencies who haven't been as close to the table as they could have been.
Interesting, thank you. Jordan, I wonder if I can come to you next to give us a bit of insight from the other end of the education journey, if that's the right way of putting it. Could you tell us a bit about the support you accessed while at university relating to living with Duchenne, and also how you found transitioning between secondary education into higher education?
I'll start with the transitioning. Basically, when I went to university, you had to start from scratch with a needs assessment as part of the disabled students allowance. So it was kind of starting from scratch with that, because the way that it's set up is different to a education healthcare plan. So it helped with like the funding for taxi travel and equipment such as like a laptop, that kind of thing. So I could use that at university But it was quite a challenge getting the support at university to begin with, because the facilities weren't up to scratch. They didn't have like a accessible bathroom, that kind of thing. So it was kind of meeting with them months in advance to tell them this is what I might need for when I start. And they started by looking at deferring me for a year because they didn't have these facilities available. But they found a loophole around it by saying I could use facilities a mile away in the city centre until they got something sorted, which took until I was starting my third and final year a couple of months ago. So stressful.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, that sounds like a very stressful experience, Jordan. And I think we'll come back to that. I think because that's some really interesting issues that you've raised. Natalie and Jane, if I can come to you next, sort of how much of what Gerry and Jordan said has sort of chimed with the experience of the families that you support, and what are the systems and sources of support that you sometimes help them navigate? Jane, shall I come to you first?
Hi. So I think what a lot of Gerry and Jordan have said resonate quite a lot. I think working very closely with the schools in infant and primary schools is far easier than getting support at university. I think if you can find a good way and link in not just with the classroom teacher but with all of the other teachers too, because obviously the children move through the years, and the sooner the whole school gets to know the young person, the child, the better, and to plan ahead for their needs and for the changes. Thinking about classrooms, for instance, in some schools where there are classrooms on 2 floors, you know, we've asked and worked with them moving all of the classes down onto the ground floor. University is a big challenge, and sadly hearing the story of young people having to defer for a year is not unusual, or even starting and then having to defer because the facilities just aren't there. One of the big difficulties is that separation of the support for education and the support for personal care needs within university that has not been a challenge usually in school so much. So there's different ways that we work to support infant and primary schools, secondary schools and universities. But I will go into schools and colleges, not so much universities, but definitely schools and colleges, and work from that level.
And Gerry mentioned the importance of how well the Solly School have been at kind of that open door of care advisors coming in and other professionals. By and large, do you find that sort of schools are very open to you going there, or do you ever find resistance? I'm particularly interested in if a school is the first time they've had to sort of work with someone with a muscle wasting condition as well.
I can only think of one school for me personally that was a challenge. So numerous appointments were made via the parent and directly with the school, and you would turn up at the school for a meeting, and I cover the West Midlands area, so sometimes it's quite a jaunt, and they would just say, oh, I'm sorry, but things have changed and we can't meet with you today. So that was a challenge, and that school were not very supportive to the young person, and it was quite a relief for the child and the parent when they moved on to secondary school to a more supportive school. Mm. But thanks, usually the schools are like Gerry says, and we get a good response and really engage well.
Oh, brilliant. And Natalie, sort of over to you really about your experience as well. Does that sort of chime with the sort of work you do from Great Ormond Street?
Yeah, generally the nurses tend to get involved when there are issues. So we have a large network of family support officers in Great Ormond Street. who will help with support towards EHCP planning, educational healthcare plans. And we sometimes get involved at the appeals process, and we try and disseminate condition-specific information to schools. I think from what Jordan and Gerry were saying, and it is a key theme, is that preparation and thinking ahead to things that might not be an issue for your child at this moment in time is really important. So like Gerry said, this is a school that when his son becomes less mobile is going to be able to facilitate his needs, and that's really important, because you don't want to, at a time in your child's life when things are changing anyway and their mobility is getting less, to then have to upheave and move to another school or have, you know, delays in education because of that. I get some resistance with schools, but I think it's more about them not knowing, and you have to try and normalize it a bit more for them. So I think that schools can be quite scared. So from a nursing perspective, for instance, children who wear spinal jackets, I've had one school say, well, we're not going to feed that child because if they choke, we can't do CPR because they're wearing a spinal jacket. So it's like things like writing a care plan to say, take the spinal jacket off and do CPR like you would on a child that doesn't have a muscle wasting condition. And sometimes it's just helping schools to see a little bit outside of the box and not be so black and white, because I think if you give them a load of information about a condition and they read all the details, it can be quite scary. And Gerry and Jordan all know yourselves, when there's so much information and there's so much to navigate, and it sounds like the school that Gerry's been working with is absolutely brilliant. And so we kind of get involved at a point if the schools just need a little bit more of a push, or if they need some more documentation just to, you know, have all dot all the I's and cross all the T's and that kind of thing. But generally, yeah, we don't really get that much resistance.
Oh, fantastic! That's really so far quite positive stories of engagement, which is good. A reminder before I go to our final panelists, if you've got any questions, we've got a couple coming in already, so do use the Q&A function. In a moment, we'll head out into kind of a panel discussion. But Liz, can I sort of turn to you now? So we've heard from the rest of the panel. I'd be really interested to hear how much of that sort of this, again, echoes what you hear from families that you're in touch with, and the kind of main education issues that people raise with you through the support group.
Yeah, I think the main issues are that the process and navigating the actual process, because there's not a lot of information that's like given to you when you go into a school environment. There seems to be, I think there's a different way of working between academies and local authority schools anyway, just how they're funded, and you know, there was a lot of times when I was going through the process years ago, and I'm going back like to 2004 maybe, that it was a statement then, and then moving over to an EHCP, that you assume that you're being guided correctly by professionals in the school, or, you know, well, particularly in the school, to be honest. And they might say no to something, and then you think, oh, well, they must know what they're doing. And so you kind of like waste time, do you know what I mean? Not being confident in yourself that you want to assess, you've got a better assessment of your child's needs, and someone's pushing back against it. So I think for me, finding a bit of support about what your child's entitled to is really like the most important thing you can do, really. So when you're getting a bit of resistance, you can go to someone and say, is this right? You know, they're saying they're not going to do this. Do you know what I mean? Or I think that's, you know, I think that's that's the big thing, really. It's when people get pushed back and they're like, am I going mad? Is this right? Is the school telling me the right? You know what I mean? So I think that's mainly the issues I get. And even just from my own experience, it's like, I wish I knew now knew then what I know now, sort of thing, going back all those years. So yeah, that's my experience.
Thanks. That's a really interesting final comment, sort of things you wish you'd known, because actually I think that's reflected in a couple of the questions we've had already. So I'll start taking those now, and as well as putting in questions to the Q&A, do please sort of make any comments you think. But I think it's a really good question in terms of someone's asked, how can you recognise a can-do school, which I think is a really good way of sort of putting it, in terms of being supportive and collaborative. I think kind of, yeah, what kind of questions would the panel recommend sort of asking schools to find out if how kind of warm and receptive they're going to be? I think sort of Natalie and Jay, if I could come to you two first, what kind of questions do you recommend parents ask specific questions, or is it more just a kind of the attitude of the school? I guess, Jane, at one end of the scale, you've got the school that cancels the meeting when you arrive versus a far more open approach.
That school didn't have a very open approach. I provided them with physical copies of the MDUK Education Guide. I provided them with the link to the MDUK Education Guide. I went in, I sat in the classroom, I looked at various things around the school that were difficult and challenging for this child, but they just did not want to engage at all. They couldn't see what the difficulties were. It was a child who had CMT, so some of the difficulties were more hidden for them, and they struggled to recognise those challenges. And then on the other hand, we will have schools that will contact us before we've even seen the child in clinic, and say we're having difficulties and someone thinks this child has a neuromuscular condition, can you come in and support us? And they engage with everything. Like Gerry says, they want to help with fundraising. I think I always recommend that parents read the MDUK Education Guide themselves, not just hand it over to the school, because it's a really valuable resource to have, that they can look at and reflect on. So that's the one thing, and I always share that with the schools that I work with.
Thanks, Jane. And Natalie, do you get a sense sort of fairly early on when you're talking to a school about kind of how proactive and that they're going to be, and kind of I love that term, that sort of can-do school.
Definitely. Sometimes I feel like schools can sort of almost get a little bit too involved. There's been instances recently where a parent's not chose yet to disclose the diagnosis of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and the schools, you know, the child's frustrated because he can't keep up with his peers and he's really naughty, so the mum must tell him. And actually this child, as quite commonly with a lot of muscular dystrophies, has associated learning difficulties. So but like I said earlier on, is once you explain those things, I generally find that when people understand, they're a lot more receptive. As a direct answer to the question, within sort of the first 5 to 10 minutes of speaking to a school, you can tell. And an example of a school that wasn't so great, it was, I don't know if it was exactly a private school, but maybe an academy in a very wealthy area of London, in a listed building. And they had told the parents that this is not a school for their son, even though he had no additional learning needs and academically was perfect, because they couldn't put a stair lift in because it was a listed building. So we had a bit of a fight on our hands, and we used your advocacy service, and we managed to, you know, pull up pictures of cathedrals with mobile stair lifts that can come in and out, and even then they were open to it, and that child was able to stay at that school, which is what they all really wanted. So I think it's quite rare that you'd get a school that are sort of really obstructive, because you can hit them with the disability discrimination, and you know, you can pull out the big guns when you need to, but generally we don't have to do that, so it is good.
And Gerry, from what you were saying, it sounds like you you did a bit of research with a number of schools. So what was it sort of leapt out about Solid School now, and kind of did you find you were sort of looking for specific things that helped you make a decision?
Yeah, I suppose you can't look past the physical environment that's in the building, and we were fortunate, and maybe it was more coincidence, happenstance, or whatever, but that particular school, it's a building that's only 2 to 3 years old. Or at that time was only 2 to 3 years old, so it should have been to all the modern standards. Not quite, because there's still a few corners that get cut that you need to pick up on. But after looking at the physical, side of the environment, it's actually just hit the nail on the head there when you said within a couple of minutes you get a feel for how the school's run through its senior management team, how welcoming they are to you. And it's true what they say, but you just get a gut feeling about it. And the other bit that we looked was how the school interacted with the community around about. It's a school that's on the periphery of a village. We looked at how it interacted with the village through social media. The school describes itself as a school family on all its publications, and if it's doing anything, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, it very much comes across as a community-oriented school, and it's got a very, very strong and down-to-earth parents association, parents council with the school as well, that has absolutely no airs and graces, and that's the beauty of it. That's the can-do element of it that's reflected in the school as well.
Oh, brilliant. And Liz, I'll come to you next, because you've raised your hand in the traditional way rather than virtually.
Hello. It was just that, and what Gerry describes is amazing, but what I would sort of, as a caveat to that, is like, that's why an EHCP is really important, because if the school management change, or the Senko changes, or your teacher changes, your EHCP is a legal document, and so whatever's in there, then they have to stick to. So if, for some reason the school management might change and you start getting pushback, this just protects you from any of that. So it's great. Like, I went to see 3 schools before I put my son in a school. It wasn't for a physical disability, but I had a physical disability, so I had needed to access the school anyway. So on 2 fronts, I needed to make sure that the school was okay. And yeah, one of the schools particularly was the right environment for my son and for me as well. So, I'd just go look at as many schools as you can, and like I say, yeah, get a feeling. I mean, obviously the physical environment, and even if it's not perfect, as long as it's the best it can, and can change, that's a really good starting point, I think. So that was, it was just about the legality of the EHCP, just in case.
I'm sure we'll return to that shortly. But firstly, Jordan, we've been talking about can-do attitude, and I'm struck that being asked to defer by a year by your university didn't strike me as being particularly can-do. So how did you sort of go about challenging that and managing to be able to sort of stick with it and get the adjustments you needed?
So I first went a couple of months before I was meant to start, and had a tour around the campus to see what was what and where they'd consider putting a change in place. So it was kind of being able to look around first before trying to make things mind up to whether it would be the best place for me to go. And then a week before I was meant to start, we had a meeting, and they said that they would have to consider deferring for a year because they haven't had time to install this change in place. And one of the lecturers on my course had mentioned that her husband had designed a change in place in the city centre, and they figured that could be a loophole of getting around not having the change in place installed till Christmas time. That the union would provide a taxi into the city centre if I needed to use the bathroom, but most of the time I spent at home rather than going into university in case I got unwell, and it's like half an hour to wait for a taxi and then go into the city centre and all that kind of thing. So it was annoying at times, not having the facility there until I started in my 3rd year. So it's been a challenge, but we fought it because I wanted to do it at that time, because I felt like I wanted to give up when I was at college. So making myself go to university and go through the experience was something that I wanted to do there and then. So I was quite stubborn about it. So they had to let me stay.
Well done. It sounds like, yeah, often that stubbornness and determination can win through. I think something we've said about EHCPs, and I think, Liz, your point about those sort of often being the bedrock, that's certainly chimed. We've had a few questions in on that. The sort of one question is the school, in a situation where a school of an 8-year-old with CMT says they can't apply for an EHCP. So is there any advice for parents applying for an EHCP? Natalie, you look like you're leaning towards the unmute button, am I right?
I was actually, yeah. One of the points I forgot to raise earlier was that quite commonly, at the point when you're applying for an EHCP, the child could appear normal to the school. Doesn't really look like there's anything wrong with them. They can sort of keep up with their peers. And it's just really about educating the school about the finer things. You know, they might appear that they're able to keep up, but actually they expend so much more energy just holding a pen and writing on a piece of paper. And I find if you've got a good team, a good care advisor or clinical nurse specialist who really understands the condition and can sit and write a very detailed letter, not just this is Duchenne or this is CMT and this is what it means, but exactly what it means for that child and how they struggle and what's important for them. I don't think to this date I've ever had a school then turn around and refuse an EHCP if it's gone to an appeal.
And Jane, within the sort of network of care advisors, are there some of your colleagues who are kind of, do you lean on each other outside of your trust area as well to kind of share that expertise? Is that something that happens?
That's something that we do a lot of, either when we could have the real life meetings, but now we've arranged some virtual meetings between ourselves. And because the care advisors come from such a varied background of maybe nurses or physios, OTs, we have such a broad wealth of experience. So if somebody out there will know the answer to a question if we all pull together, and we very often do that, and that's how we continue to learn too. And we often learn from parents that have found other ways of doing things. So it isn't that the care advisors and clinical nurse specialists know everything. We are also still learning, and we learn from the parents and from the young people, the children and the young people themselves. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember.
Great, thank you. We've had a really good question here that I suspect may become more of a sort of hot topic in the sort of weeks ahead, but someone whose grandchild has myotonic dystrophy type 1 and is in the process of applying, needs to start applying for secondary school, but is worried that their EHCP won't have the right evidence in place by the October deadline. Is that something you're coming across, particularly because of COVID? And also, is there a kind of rush every October for that deadline? Liz, is that something that's come through your helpline at all? Well, you're the first person I have to say you're on mute.
Yeah, so different authority, because it's a council where the council have to sort of ratify the EHCP, don't they, once a year. Sometimes they can be, it can take months for that to go through. I think our EHCP was always sort of we tried to do the update at Easter time, around Easter, just to give it enough time. But I've had to chase and say, look, I haven't got a copy of this document. I need it. You need it for all sorts of things when it's applying for a benefit or something. The EHCP helps with various things. So I think 1 year it came through naturally without me having to chase it. So with COVID, I don't know. I just know that there's backlogs with everything. So when I've emailed the council recently about other things, I've not had a response. So, but that might not be for everybody.
And, and Jane and Natalie, just more broadly, so away from COVID, I guess, sort of, is there often a sort of an issue just getting the right kind of evidence in place? I think, Natalie, you mentioned that often an EHCP would be needed before the school sort of realises it, if that makes sense.
I think it's just about the way that it's written sometimes. Like I said, you can be really generic about the actual condition, but they're so personalised. And echoing what Jane said, pretty much when a parent asks me to support with an EHCP letter, my initial response is, okay, let's sit and have a chat and you tell me exactly what your child needs. Because I could sit and write you a lovely letter about a condition, but it's not really personalised to that child and what they're going to need at certain points during the day. And it's really important to get the little details, like, you know, you could send a child to school in a wheelchair and they could sit in that chair all day, but actually we all know how much of a benefit physio is. So you've got to be really detailed to make sure that they get the best care, and we can keep them as mobile as long as possible, and they can interact for as long as possible in the day and be pulled out for those rest breaks if that's what they need as well. I mainly work with children at the start of their school journeys, and one of the other good things that is useful is informing the other children about it as well, so that it's not sort of this thing that's hidden. And there's some great books out there. You can search on Amazon. There's one from a charity. I'm really sorry, I can't remember the charity, and someone's actually stolen my copy of the book. I tried to look for it the other day. It's called Dan with DMD. I don't know if any of you guys have come across it, but I often will send a copy of, or ask the charity to send a copy of that out to schools, and it can be included at story time as early as reception, just so that the child with the disability feels like they can talk about it as well, or that they don't have to explain themselves all of the time.
One of the sometimes I've gone into schools and the young person themselves have requested that I go in and speak to their class specifically about their condition. Some people, young people, want me to speak to their year group, but I've also done a sort of generic disability awareness, and because I'm a wheelchair user myself, I can tackle lots of the issues from that aspect, because the young person doesn't want to be not identified, because they do know that this young person has a condition, but they don't want to be the main topic of conversation. They need it to be a more generic. So it's about, again, personalising it to the child and how they feel that they want the subject tackled. But I'm happy to do whatever suits their needs. It can sometimes be a bit challenging talking to a large school. That's what.
Liz, you touched on one of the questions that's come through actually in your answer about the annual review of EHCPs, but someone's highlighted that their local authority struggles to fulfil that duty. So asking kind of what legal objections they can use if that's not happening. Have any of the panel got experience of sort of parents having to go down the sort of a legal route to sort of challenge a local authority?
I think I always put, if I needed to chase them, I'd tend to either put it in writing, just basically put it in writing, like an email. I mean, you can ring them and then nothing happens. So I think if you're ever challenging anything or wanting clarification on anything, I would just get it in writing, because then you've got, you know, when later on, if they say, oh, this didn't happen or whatever, you can prove that it did. I'm not sure, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anyone has experience of anybody with employed a solicitor to navigate this. I'm sure there is precedent, but I've not come across that yet.
I'm seeing some other shaking heads from the panel. So that's one of the things that we may take away and look at after the session and kind of update through our website. A really interesting question coming through around sort of homeschooling. So Natalie and Jane in particular, have you worked with parents who've opted to homeschool their children at all?
I definitely have within the SMA community from an early age, but I think that that's more centred around the respiratory difficulties and getting out of the house with the winter months. So thinking about later on with Duchenne for some of our children who are struggling, particularly needing BiPAP, some families have chosen to homeschool, but generally on the whole, most young adults and children stay in school.
I agree. I've not had to support any parents who have chosen to homeschool completely. There may have been times when they've fallen out of the mainstream everyday school and had to have some schooling at home, but not for the whole of their education. No, it's just been they've dipped in and out, maybe.
We also have some children that go to school more so in the summer months and might pull back a bit in the winter months, and we work closely with those schools to ensure that they, you know, meet all of the needs for their education.
Great, thank you. I'm struck that we haven't, 45 minutes in, we haven't really spoken about coronavirus or COVID yet. So I'd just be interested in, conscious that Gerry up in Scotland, I think 4 or 5 weeks ahead of schools returning here, but interested to hear kind of whether you had any concerns about sort of going back to school, and then also sort of Jane, Natalie and Liz in particular, whether any families were raising concerns with you. We sort of heard earlier in our session on mitochondrial disease that actually sort of, generally speaking, families seem to be quite confident going back after getting the right advice, but we're interested to hear kind of your perspective. Gerry, could I come to you first, if you don't mind, about how you felt about sort of going back?
Yeah, there was a bit of apprehensive bit about it. He needed to go back because you're touching on the homeschooling side of it. It was challenging, as it was challenging for every family, you know, across the country. And we spoke with the head teacher in the school over the course of the summer, and initially in Scotland the arrangement was that it would be a blended approach, so there was a discussion about how that might look, and then as things progressed, it was the socially distanced classroom concept was the next thing that came up, and at that point, once the school had been laid out in a socially distanced fashion, Sorley, myself and Sarah were invited up to actually go and get a tour around the school while it was still closed over the period of the summer, so that we could actually see what, more for Sorley's benefit, to see what it could look like, and as it happens, with the way that the legislation's been laid out in Scotland now, is that the primary schools are operating without that extensive degree of social distancing. But it has had an impact, because Sorley does talk about some of his friends who are in different classes, that they're not in the same bubble as him, so that they maybe have different playtimes. The big one for us was getting them into school in the morning, and how we do that in a safe manner. Sarah, by virtue of her own health, fell into the shielding category as well, and she's normally the one that does the school run, so that was on, we had to explain that, and then explain that in a bit of detail, and sure enough, there's a member of staff meets Sorley at the school gate that he comes into. They changed the layout of how people go in and out of school. I imagine that's happened in many places, and we have a soft finish to the day, which we'd introduced because he just found the week so challenging that he was exhausted by the afternoon, and that's when, you know, I heard the word used earlier on. It personifies as naughtiness, and things can be perceived as not looking at the disability but looking at a naughty child, and particularly younger kids in the class as well, who see these behaviours and whatnot. So we were worried about that through the COVID kind of thing as well, on how can Sorley keep that distance without being perceived as, you know, being the one that steps out of line and whatnot. So we've got the soft finish to the day as well, where he's brought to the front door, a different door of the school, and that's where we pick him up, and he's brought there by a member of staff. So yeah, it was a concern. Touch wood, it's worked out very well, but it is about, as a parent, initiating the communication with the school as well. They have got so much on their minds at the moment, and juggling so much, and legislation and guidance that changes at hour's notice. You really got to be on the front foot as a parent, and put that phone call in, followed up by an email, and say, but what about us? Sorry, I appreciate you've got a lot on at the moment, but so have we.
Great, thanks, Gerry. Jane and Natalie, it was interesting to hear kind of, did you get a kind of a lot of people asking about that kind of return to school in the run-up schools going back, and fears about COVID, and how big a topic has it been for care advisors and the nurse team?
Huge. Every single day we get messages, voicemails. It's really scary. I mean, a few months ago we were telling everybody to stay at home, and COVID hasn't really gone anywhere, and now we're sending everybody back because over time the evidence has emerged that we're not that worried about children's. And there's that document from the Royal College of Paediatrics, which I know a lot of the doctors within the neuromuscular network have contributed towards, to say that the benefit of children going back to school is outweighing what we see are the risks if they were to catch COVID. But we also don't have any evidence or any data for people with neuromuscular conditions who have had COVID, because you've all done such a brilliant job of shielding. So I actually, as a nurse, feel a bit stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I often try and put myself in the shoes of that parent. And I think, probably wouldn't really want my child going to school at the start of winter during COVID. But then, as Gerry said, the kids need to be back at school. How long has it been since everyone's gone 6 months without having their child in a routine or being at school? It's really beneficial for everybody. And sorry, that's my mother's phone ringing in the background. And it's just about weighing it up individually. We've actually not told anyone that they can't go back to school. And we're working on it on an individual basis. So we're looking at local levels of infection. If there are any local lockdowns, then we will then go back to our consultants, and it still won't be a straight, yes, you need to shield. The government haven't been very clear on what happens to those who are shielding if we go back into a lockdown. And from what's gone on recently with saying that 6 people, I don't know if it's the same for you in Scotland, Gerry, but from Tuesday, tomorrow 6 people can only meet, but you can still go to the pub. So I'm not really sure if we go into another lockdown what the case is going to be. But if it does turn out that those who were shielding before aren't straight away shielding, then we will have to look at it on individual basis with the respiratory teams, the cardiac teams, the parents, and even during the period of shielding, there were certain families that were supposed to be shielding and their children did go back to school because they had some severe learning difficulties, and it was more beneficial for those families in that time to have those children in that structured environment. And I think this will be a battle throughout winter.
And Jane, before you come in, your experience working with families, is an interesting question. Given you work across both adults and children, a question actually from a teacher living with a muscle wasting condition, around managing his condition in school. So I wonder, kind of, firstly, if you could build anything Natalie said around sort of families' concerns around going back to school, but then also how do you sort of suggest adults talk to their workplace, not just as a teacher, I guess, but kind of how do you have any sort of tips for that?
I agree with absolutely everything Natalie said. It has been huge. The fears, the worries. We've had some parents who have been desperate for the children to go back because, it's been so exhausting for them trying to homeschool, maybe work themselves at the same time. And we have some young people that have also raised their own anxieties, who maybe had a little bit of school anxiety issues anyway. They've just now grown out of all proportion. So it is working with each child and each parent as individuals. I've had to go and ask that question that Natalie mentioned today about, as you know, Birmingham, Solihull, Sandwell are all in local little mini lockdowns now. And again, parents are now saying, but now we're in this, does this mean we now go back on shielding? Again, I've had to go back to consultant to say, what do we advise? Do we still go with government and local guidelines? What do we do? But I think ultimately it's the parents' choice, and they have to know that their child is safe at school. And if they don't feel that their child is safe, then I think I would not say to any parent, you must absolutely, send your child to school. That child has to be safe, and the parents have to feel that the child is safe. With regards to the adult, who's a teacher, work have a responsibility. So have they carried out a risk assessment? What does that risk assessment look like? Have they involved any occupational health teams that they have to support? Because schools have a legal responsibility to keep their teachers as well as their pupils safe. So I think it is about talking to the school directly. As a person who has a disability, they are legally entitled to be supported and safe in the workplace. So maybe speak to other teachers across the networks that they may have and ask how have others tackled this. I've seen something today in the paper, I think it was in the news, about a teacher who's having to isolate for some reasons and carrying on doing their classes virtually. So children are at school, I believe, and the teachers linking in virtually. We have to make use of the technology that we have now.
Thanks, Jane. And Jordan, just before we started the seminar, we were sort of talking about you not graduating yet physically because of the COVID. So you became a graduate during the COVID period. What was it like, your sort of final period of study, and what advice would you give to other people with muscle wasting conditions who are at university now about sort of staying connected and trying to kind of keep part, get as much out of the university experience as possible?
So in the last few weeks of my study, everything was done online. So we had like a weekly meeting over Zoom to check in with everybody, see what everybody was up to in terms of where they were with the final project. So for me, doing a project about living with Duchenne and the day-to-day life through lockdown, being at home all the time was a huge help in that aspect. Being able to document the things that I would normally be doing at home and having the time to do it. But I guess just make the most of the technology at the minute. There's other ways of being able to do the work than going into the campus where you might not feel as safe with all the restrictions that are still in place and all the other ones that are coming back. But yeah, all the services are still available at uni, even though it's more virtual now.
Thank you. And it's a fascinating sort of note to sort of explore, because right at the start of this series we explored living in a world of COVID, and our final seminar later in October is on specifically looking at neuromuscular services, and it'll be fascinating to see what's changed in COVID by that point, because as you say, there's more cases are rising, and will there be another lockdown? I think the points that both Natalie and Jane you raised around parent choice, and what we found interesting as MDUK when we've sort of worked and been part of kind of cross-government workshops right at the beginning of the sort of shielding process was a fairly swift narrative change to it's down to personal choice. It's you've got to make that personal choice based on guidance, and it's very difficult then to support people to know exactly how to make that choice. I think that's going to be a key thing, particularly as we enter sort of the winter months. I'm conscious that we're a few minutes from having to finish now. I wonder if any of the panel have got any sort of final remarks they'd like to make. It's been fantastic having you all with us. Anything anyone to build on, any final points? Liz, you've come off mute, which is always my good sign that
yeah, it was just picking up on what Jordan said about about having accommodation at uni. Actually, I think with DSA you can. Obviously it would be just ridiculous if you stayed in halls the first year and then had to find accommodation afterwards. So obviously you can actually apply to stay in halls for the whole time of your education. I know my son actually went to De Montfort in Leicester, which he's got to go back there, so that's interesting. And they did this disability, the DSA assessment on site, which was amazing. They were really, really good. Because I could have gone to Northampton and had it done, but we didn't. So that's another thing. Some unis are, I think most unis are really good, but yeah, I think if the facilities are already there, then that's gonna be a challenge. So yeah, I just thought I'd raise that. Just about the halls thing that you can stay for 3 years.
Thank you. We had a very interesting question just pop up around research into people with a neuromuscular condition who have had COVID, and that's sort of almost a sort of separate question, but that came up in a previous session actually in research around the fact that there are a number of studies now looking to find, because I think the point, Jane, I think you made that point around people who've been so good at shielding that actually there isn't that much knowledge of what happens when someone with a neuromuscular condition is exposed to COVID. So that's certainly something that MDUK is looking to kind of find out more about, and we're kind of promoting those surveys. So I'm conscious 5:30. If any of the panel want to say any final words, I'm going to come off mute, and I can see Natalie. That's very quick off the draw.
The only other thing I'd just like to briefly touch on, and this is specific to anyone who's on steroids with a neuromuscular condition, is I think it's going to be national. I know we've been in talks with Muscular Dystrophy UK about this. Is the adrenal suppression risks, and we were going to do some mass training sessions because we changed within GOSH our guidance from doubling up your dose of daily steroid to actually adding in hydrocortisone 4 times a day. And we had to train, I think, nearly 300 families. There's also an emergency injection, and there's a flow sheet with signs and symptoms, which is given to schools. And one of the things that is given to the schools is the hydrocortisone tablets and the injections. And we don't expect the school to give the injection, but to just know the signs and symptoms. And it's all written down in an individual healthcare plan. But it's just that it's recognising that and getting in touch with people. I think I said this last time I was on with you guys, and not leaving things till the last minute because you're worried that we're going to be stressed because of COVID. There's pretty much always someone around. Even when we were all redeployed, there was at least one CNS around. And if anyone from any schools are concerned about anything that parents might have said or they don't understand, to just try and get in touch with the specialist centres and the care advisors and work together really to keep everyone safe.
Great. Thank you very much. That's a very sort of positive note to end on, because we are now sadly out of time. So a huge thanks to Natalie, to Jordan, Jane, Gerry and Liz. I really hope you've enjoyed the discussion, and we've had some great questions coming in as well. So thank you. That's really helped to sort of move the discussion along. A reminder that you can get the details of the other seminars, the sort of remaining 6 in the series, on our website, and that you'll be able to access the recording of this session later in the week. And we'll also be in touch with a very short survey to gather some feedback on the session, which will be really invaluable as we help sort of make sure that the remaining 6 are as informative and accessible as possible. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, and thanks again to our panel. It's been great having you with us. Thank you.